Have you ever found yourself the dumbest guy in the room? I did. I'm David Rhodes, Fire Engineering, with July's Editor's Opinion. We're talking about research this month, and I wanted to share a little story that I had as it evolved around fire service research. I had been in the fire service probably 25 years, had been a battalion chief about 10 years, and in my department, the chief brought in an instructor for one of our professional developments, and that happened to be Steve Kerber. And he did a class on the UL FSRI horizontal ventilation study that had come out. And this has been back 15 plus years ago. And so I had read this research paper, sort of brushed over it, I should say. I didn't really read it in its entirety. I looked at the highlights because some fellow fire service instructors had sent it to me, and I was curious about it. But my takeaway from it was, if you opened up the knocked all the windows out of the house or what have you, that the fire would grow in intensity, and I didn't really see any reason to disagree with that. But I didn't really fully digest the information that was in the report. So when I saw Steve, I was able to ask him some questions after his class. And his class was quite good. It answered a lot of questions for me that I had after cursory reviewing the report, and it spurred some additional curiosity. But I was a bit confident in my abilities as an incident commander and as a former truck person, and had cut many holes in roofs and seen the effects. So I went up to him afterwards and said, I have never been on a scene where we lost a structure where we successfully vertically ventilated the structure. And that was true at the time. And he was curious about that. So we had a little bit of a discussion. And I said, but when are you going to study real ventilation? By my definition, that was vertical ventilation. And I said it probably a bit cocky at the time. And he said, well, actually, that's coming up next. And he immediately invited me to be on that panel. And I thought for a second, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to go in with all my vast knowledge, fireground experience, and years of tried true practice on the fire scene. And I'm going to be asked to educate these scientists that carry little pencils and slide rules. And I was like, this really doesn't seem fair, but of course I'll do it. That'll be great fun for me. So I got invited and I went up there, and one of the first things we did with about 25 people from around the country was go around the room and everybody told their experiences and their department practices with vertical ventilation. And I was quickly puzzled by the differences just in 25 different departments around the country of various sizes, that everybody had a little bit different practice, a little bit different policy. And when the representative from FDNY spoke up and said that they did not use vertical ventilation on residential structures, I thought that I was trapped in a bad dream, possibly stuck on Safety Island somewhere. And I had to pinch myself to make sure that I was actually in a real meeting. But it opened my eyes to something, that all fire departments and all firefighting is local, and building construction, roof pitches, a lot of that comes into play with the tactics. So later that night, we're all hanging out at the restaurant and talking, and there was no fear of public embarrassment in front of a large group. So I started going to these individuals that had said something about not doing vertical ventilation or limited vertical ventilation. And I quickly found out that the reasons that they didn't do it were exactly the same reasons that I would choose not to do it in certain circumstances in my department. For instance, extremely steep, limited access type roofs. Obviously, up north, the roofs are more 12-12 to let the snow fall off. Where down in the south where I was, we had a combination of everything. Most roofs are pretty low pitched. You can pretty much go up there and hold a party on them. They're so low pitched, but we do have some that are steep. We have a lot of different styles. We have clay roofs. We have different materials that kind of create another hazard. And so the things that they didn't do, I actually wouldn't do either. So that opened my eyes to further see what it was. Then as we got into the actual test, I was sitting there one day watching one of these structures that we built in the lab and watching how it progressed through and how the ventilation worked. And sure enough, as they opened the front door, the fire increased in intensity very rapidly because the inside was too rich. It was vent limited and it needed oxygen. And so the ventilation principles started to click in my head. Now, I had been teaching VES for 20 years at that point and fully understood that if I took a window out, that I needed to go and shut the door to limit the ventilation so that the fire wouldn't come into that room. But never once had I ever equated opening the door to being the same thing. And it's just a matter of context of where you are and how you learned and what people told you at the time. So I knew fire behavior pretty good from being a structural fire control instructor, but that little piece of understanding never clicked that opening the door was the same thing. And I even realized that if I opened the door, fire was eventually going to come to the door at some point, not knowing how long or all the information about where the fire was. Obviously, there's different timing in that, but all of the pieces had not aligned until that moment watching that experiment. And it suddenly hit me. It's like, this is absolutely no different than a grill. And again, being from the South and being a professional tailgater here with the SEC League, we know a lot about grills. And so one of our favorite is obviously the Komodo and green egg style grills, and where you open the bottom vent, you open the top vent. But it's true of any grill. If you open the bottom vent, that's the front door. You open the top, that's the roof. The fire, the heat in the grill gets higher almost immediately unless you take some other action. If we look at a house that way, we can obviously see that happens if we don't have a hose line in place. So that was a big aha moment. And I quickly realized that despite my vast experience and knowledge and numerous fires and command and control and being on a truck crew and venting roofs, that all of a sudden I had to acknowledge that the engine crew actually plays a pretty significant role in the extinguishment of a fire. It wasn't the holes I was cutting. So I found out that we were accidentally doing everything right in my department. We had the adequate staffing to be able to vertically ventilate, and our hose crews were timing naturally such that we had a fire attack crew in place as we were opening up. And so accidentally we were successful. We understand it now. We understand that that's coordinated attack and ventilation and how important it is. So if you're one of those folks that don't completely trust the research, if you're somebody who hasn't really dug deep into understanding the research and talking to people who were involved in some of the research and some of the tactical recommendations, I strongly suggest that you always keep an air of skepticism, because that's important. You need to ask questions because that's part of the understanding thing. But before you just go out there and start bashing research and tactics that are based on research, just remember, you might find yourself one day as the dumbest guy in the room, like me. Thanks.